with News Diary. It's about that time when we cross over to our sister station, Spice FM, and they're having a discussion on the Finance Bill 2024. And this time, it's the civil society's perspective. Of course, they are with Annette Nerima, who is a human rights defender and a program manager, Kenya Human Rights Commission. So let's cross over and listen in.
Let's introduce our guest. Annette Nerima is a human rights defender. That's why I brought in that conversation. And he is a program manager at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. Annette, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Thank you so much.
Karibu
for having me
sana.
here.
Hapa, we are peace-loving people. Hard-working people.
Hardworking people.
Welcoming people. Yeah. This is a groundbreaking case, isn't it?
Absolutely.
This one, we wait to see how it pans out.
Let's wait and see.
Let's see.
But it reminds me of a story, especially the stateless communities in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And like the good example you've given, the Shona community, they'd lived in Kenya for more than 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And these are people who did not have identity documents for close to 50 years, you can imagine. I mean, you would have today an 18-year-old who has not gotten the identification documents. What does that mean? It means they can't even open a bank account.
Yeah.
Literally, your life is shut. And so this is a whole community. People's children have gone to school, but they are unable to further, especially with the digitization era, where we see that, for example, when you do not have this birth certificate, you're not able to enroll in the education system of the country. So again, I think it just basically reminds me of the remarkable journey of the Kenya Human Rights Commission and a few other civil society organizations towards pushing and working also in partnership with the government to ensure that these communities attain these citizenship
I have to ask this. So what documentation did they have?
They didn't have identity.
They were not even called aliens.
They didn't even have birth certificates.
Nothing. I mean,
But what about children who are born here?
they didn't, because you see now their parents' origin wasn't traced.
Wait, people come into this country, they have some sort of identification.
Well, this ones didn't.
Unfortunately not. You see, like, for example, the Shona, they came in, and you see, by the time we were getting independence, and where all of us and our grandparents were registering, they didn't. I think maybe because they came in as missionaries, so perhaps they had a hope of going back to their country, but they ended up living here without any document for all those years. So
It's a big issue. Even the Nubians of Kibera. Remember when you hosted
Yes, those two individuals,
the Nubian?
the sheikh and the doctor.
Yes.
Yes.
And the doctor was telling us he is here, he is in Kenya, but just to get his children recognized, he has to undergo a lot. He has to go.
In fact, he explained the problem, what he went through.
Yeah. You're here. You're born and bred in
Well,
Nairobi.
you don't know anywhere else.
This is your home. But then just to go and get an ID, you go bring bring babu yako, nyinyi wote, nyinyi wote.
You know, those are colonial things.
Yeah.
It's the colonialists who had all those rules for Africans. Go where, bring chief, bring God knows what else. Anyway. Aishuru.
Anyway, now speaking of the Shona and the Ndebele, the proverb today, this week is from
Zimbabwe.
and all of the big tribes in Zimbabwe.
Well, it's the Shona.
Zimbabwe.
Yes, and then by the way, border. You know, Zimbabwe also borders Mozambique. So it's not difficult to understand how these things happen. They also border Zambia. They also border South Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Proverb. Do not be like the mosquito that bites the owner of the house.
Do not be like the mosquito that bites the owner of the house. Annette, what's your interpretation of this proverb?
Wow. Wow, that's an amazing one. So I would just basically situate it in the current political economic system that we live in. And so it's basically looking at the parasitic nature of individuals, and also perhaps I would look at it in terms of the leadership largely, where, for example, we as the citizens, we believe that sovereign power belongs to us. We have delegated it to the leaders, would call them the members of parliament, for example, be it the county assembly members as well, to be able to lead us, and broadly just serve us. But at the end of the day, all we see is that they end up feeding from us.
They become mosquitoes.
Yes, who are the owner of the house. Yeah.
So if you're a member of parliament or an MCA in this country, the proverb against it:
do not be like the mosquito that bites the owner of the house.
remember the owner of the house.
Yes.
So we are in the season of discussing and understanding what tax proposals are contained in the Finance Bill 2024, which shortly will be discussed through Parliament. The Parliamentary Committee on Finance and Planning is collecting views from all stakeholders on what they think about the tax proposals proposed by the National Treasury. And then Parliament will discuss that and maybe amend, maybe not, maybe pass, maybe not, but there will be new tax measures coming into the next financial year. As a civil society movement, I'm sure you've looked at the Finance Bill and you've picked out some areas that would be good for the country that may be having a negative impact on the civil society. Let's start with the good. Anything positive?
There are positives within the Finance Bill 2024. And I think even raising this is, first of all, appreciating that as a nation, we need to be able to generate taxes to enable the country or the government to be able to generate revenue and be able to serve the citizen, or be able to just broadly ensure that the governance system is actually functioning. So that's really important. And certainly this Finance Bill, much as it has punitive proposals, it also has the pros. But I think perhaps before I just respond to the question, we as civil society organization, first of all, knowing our broad role where we basically advocate for the needs and concerns of the citizenry, and also basically appreciating that when you talk about tax, this is the clearest representation of a social contract. And so looking at this whole conversation, much as we bring in the technical element, I think we cannot discuss the Finance Bill 2024 and even 2023 last year. I think that's the other element that as civil society we missed, without bringing in the politics angle of it. Because at the end of the day, when you talk about policy conversation, when you look at the Finance Bill and, for example, a trend that has been set already, the politics took the day. And so as we are engaging in these processes within the legal frameworks as well, it's also important that we bring in the political angle. And that's why in our approach, we do the both adversarial and we also take the partnership bit of it. And for example, right now, looking at the framework or the timelines that we have, it's and today actually civil society organization, a team of us is actually meeting the finance and the planning committee where we are sharing our memorandum and some of the proposals that we have given. But again, it's also important that we bring in the political bit of it. And when I say tax is the clearest representation of social contract, we come from a point where we are saying on the 9th of August, 2022, Kenyan went to the ballot. And the result of that was the Kenya Kwanza regime, which ideally Kenyans voted based on the promises that they were given. The bottom-up economic transformational agenda, which was basically advancing the hustler narrative. So that is the reason as to why we have this government in being. And so it's important that as these conversations are happening, the ordinary Kenyan is also trying to situate themselves. Where are we in this Finance Bill? As I'm raising taxes, as I'm paying my taxes, what am I gaining? Those are only political questions that have to be asked. At the same time, there's the issue of constitutionality. We talk about the rule of law. When you talk about the rule of law, and I know a conversation around public participation has really happened. But again, looking at Article 10 of the Constitution, which provides for the principles of governance. One of them, and when it talks about principle of governance, it says state officers and public officers are bound by this principle. One of them being human rights, the other one sustainable development, good governance, non-discrimination, name them, there are many, but I want to touch on public participation. We had public participation last year, and people keep on saying public participation happened, it happened and all that. Personally, I appreciate the fact that we are now at a point where we are talking about generating a public participation policy, which I strongly believe, if adopted, will be able to guide this whole conversation about public participation, because it's chaotic right now as is. We are having public participation, but not meaningful public participation. And a basic definition of public participation is engaging the public, but at the same time, giving full consideration of their input. With honesty, the public participation during the 2023 finance bill, 90% from the survey that was done by civil society organization, about 93% of the public views were not put into consideration. That just leaves us with about 7%. You know, it's really minimal. And so to any Kenyan, when you look at that survey, they were disgruntled by the outcome of the act at the end of the day. And we saw politics play the day, where we saw the president, for example, say he's on the lookout to see the MP who was allied to Kenya Kwanza, who was going to vote against the finance bill. We now see members of parliament from the Mount Kenya region say, yes, we passed the bill, but unfortunately we didn't read the bill, you know. And that's an injustice to even Kenyans.
How do we then gauge that public participation as an idea then is effective? I remember being taught on issues of communication, and we're taught that proper communication, I don't just say something to you, but then I look at the feedback and then I know that at some level communication has been complete. How do we gauge that with public participation? Does that mean that because I participated as a citizen, that if my views are not taken into consideration, do we say then that public participation was ineffective?
I think there are so many parameters to it for us to gauge and get to a level where we can now say this is meaningful public participation. Mm-hmm. A good example would be we have these conversations where we are all meeting the finance and planning committee of the National Assembly. If we were given a notice of about 3 days, that would be insufficient, for example, to allow me to prepare adequately and come and give substantive input into that conversation. Mm-hmm. Again, to an ordinary Kenyan, I'm a technical person, I can understand and review and analyze the finance bill, but not every Kenyan can do it, you know? Mm-hmm. So we are also expecting that if Parliament, for example, is investing in engaging in public participation, it would as well invest in communicating and conscientizing the public on what this bill is all about, and perhaps how is the bill is benefiting them or not, so that they can be able to as well gauge and make an informed decision as they engage, you know? So
there are many thresholds upon which public participation can be deemed effective or meaningful.
Absolutely.
So even if we're saying that across board, not 100%, but across board at some level, there's an understanding, for example, of what the finance bill actually means, in meaning, in definition alone, that what does it portend? That you have a finance bill, before your budget then is read, you know what it means. If we have a general understanding, or can we even say that public participation even means that people who've come to the table have a basic understanding of what this thing is, before we even get into the different factors that make up the bill? Would we say then that public participation has taken place if across board folks understand that this finance bill we're talking about, what it actually means towards budget and for the country?
Absolutely. And I think even in responding to the same, for example, I like what the law really has gotten us into, where we are tabling the finance bill, but the budget process is as well happening. So we are clear on the taxes that we are raising and how they're going to be spent, for example. So you see, much as I get into this conversation, I can already tell, is the government going to put my money into good use, first of all? That alone is enough for an individual, when they look at the finance bill, to even deduce and say, this is not right, or this is right. You know, so I appreciate that kind of conversation. And I think for me, it's just basically to say that all the parameters as regards public, but including even feedback. For example, some of the critical proposals that, for example, civil society provided to the Finance and Appropriation Committee. A report was done after the retreat, and that report, again, in my view, I would say is technical, was not out there in the public domain, you know. So really, people do not have answers as to why some of their proposals, or most of them, were perhaps thrown out or perhaps were not put into consideration. So there are many angles to public participation, and for me, I think when you talk about meaningful public participation, it really should be looked at holistically.
Sure.
There's something that you've said that after last year's, conversation around the finance bill before it became, and then it went on and became the act, the Finance and Planning Committee received views from the public. People were engaging in various fora, and those views ended up with the Kuria Kimani Committee. And then you've said that thereafter, the civil society conducted some survey which found that a majority of the views were not taken into consideration. Tell us a bit about that survey. How did you conduct it? What did you ask? What did you do?
So one of the civil society organizations, Tuaweza, East Africa, and CFA, Center for Fiscal Accountability. Yes, you're right. So those two organizations, and they're part of Okwa Uchumi, which most of the civil society that work around public debt and public finance management are part of. So these two organizations, because all of us bring in our strengths on this forum. So they did this study and were asking Kenyans randomly, what was their take? Do they think, or do they believe that their input into the finance bill was put into consideration? And hence the outcome that I've indicated, about 93% indicated that their views were not put into consideration.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did they actually present their views? The people who were sampled, was the first question, did you present your views to the Finance Committee? And to find out how they actually presented their views to the Finance Committee.
Okay, so how this survey was done, it was looking at the different segments of the society. A snowballing one, but you see, in so doing, you also ensure that different stakeholders and also categories of Kenyans are put into consideration, be it the manufacturing sector, the profession, and all that.
Okay.
So basically looking at them based on their level of engagement as well. And you see, when you look at level of engagement, it even means the public protests, because it's a form of public participation, just demonstrating that I'm a disgruntled Kenyan and I am not happy with the punitive tax proposals that have been provided or given in this finance bill. So they participated in various ways, including going to the before the Finance and Planning Committee, but also using other avenues, including media, to just be able to share,
to express their views. Because I'm lost here between people who have expressed their views. They've engaged here in public fora, or calling onto Spice FM in the Situation Room, or speaking in various baraza, but they have not presented those views to that committee. And then in the end, you ask them, so do you feel happy that how you expressed yourself was actually considered by the committee? And of course, they'll say no. Now, in the end, when you say over 90% of people's views were not considered by the committee, what are we using? We are then using what came out, the committee report, versus the public sentiment. But do we have an interlink between the public sentiment and the committee and then the report? Because the report contained a summary, or in fact, it was saying we received views on this particular clause, we received views on the other clause, here we did this and the other, here we also considered. The report did that. So when we say that over 90% of public sentiment was not contained in this report, what exactly do we mean?
I look at it from a representation point of view. For example, you can talk to a Kenyan out there, but they are perhaps affiliated to a labor organization, or they work through, for example, social justice centers, which are based across the country. I mean, we see very many human rights defenders in these social justice centers, which are mostly in the informal segment, but they also cut across the nation. So their views are represented through their representatives. They share memorandums through their leadership. But that compounds or brings together their views. So when they say they were not put into consideration, it's not them literally coming as individuals, but at least they were through the organizations that they hold. If it's the profession, for example, it will be through their leadership, but people came in numbers. And I think for the first time ever, we all agree that the Finance Bill 2023 brought Kenyans together. And every Kenyan felt like they were going to be affected directly. And so they came out through the various ways that I have explained to just be able to express that they are unhappy and they want to contribute to this conversation, whichever way. Yes.
Okay. So I guess the reason I'm asking that is so that we can, as we continue the conversation about public participation and the meaningful public participation, is also looking at it from, are the views of the public actually reaching the people who ought to be hearing those views? Or should we have another way of ensuring that those people hear the public? And then we can quantify that the people heard the public, they listened to the public, they ignored the public, or they put the public views into consideration.
I think even hearing you, something interesting is coming to my mind, and it's basically played out in 2023, and we continue to see it even as a nation. Today, the new streets are social media, and we have seen policy decisions and actions happen through social media. So those are new streets. Much as we are having individuals going before the finance and planning committee of the National Assembly to present their views, we have seen the power of social media where people can protest there and duty bearers will listen. So I think even moving forward, and for me, when I talk about the multi-pronged approach, is basically Kenyans to express themselves with the available platforms, legal platforms, to just air, because the parliamentarians listen. And it's through those social media that they also communicate with their own people. So as they communicate to their own people, they also pick views at that particular point. So I think that's really, really an interesting angle to it. And I think it would be an important thing that the committee and the National Assembly in general also consider other platforms as well to just pick the views and the brains of Kenyans around this finance bill conversation.
Let's take a break.